What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Saturday Morning College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you for another week of college football action. After a crazy week last week, lots of landmines out there a week ago. Outside of, maybe a couple of the chalk plays that hit, it was a rough week out there. Plenty of tilt to go around. And this week we have a really interesting slate that, frankly, the DraftKings slate, I think, is kind of ugly this week. There's not a ton of options. It's not like we're going to be giving you, 30 plays at each position that we feel great about. It's a tough slate. So the Fanduel slate, maybe a little bit better, a little bit more exciting. A few higher total games on there, but we will see what we can make of it here over the next 45 minutes or so. I am Justin Van Zuden, a.k.a. STL Cardinals 84. I've got my usual co-host, Micah Bedard, alongside me. Micah, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Justin. Like you said, last week was, a lot of lines were just dead after the 11 o'clock games. And it's funny how it flips as all the 11 o'clock games this week. There's only 4 of them on DraftKings.
Yeah, they're horrible.
They're horrible. And not only that, there's pretty bad, not bad weather, but impactful weather in terms of that too. So it's, a lot of lineups. I'll just say this. If you want to take some early screenshots today, just like stack a couple of those games. That'll help out us to stack a couple of the games. And then that's why I put in my article. If you want to play like a Peyton Thorne, Keon Coleman, and Jaden Reed stack, yeah, you can just hopefully like they catch 1 or 2 touchdowns in the first half and then just post a screenshot to your friends. But yeah, FanDuel slate's a little bit better. Like all their afternoon and evening games are good. And then like we were talking about before, if you really want to chase Mike Wright week, you can definitely do that on FanDuel.
Yeah, sounds like a great time if you want to do that. We'll see what becomes of his performance today, but we'll go ahead and go through the slate here and see what it has to offer. Again, the early kicks, 3 Big Ten games, and then TCU Baylor, so not a whole lot of excitement with the 12 o'clock games. Injury news, Adrian Martinez is out for Kansas State today, so we do know that. Let's see. Ohio State running back situation we got to keep an eye on. Mayan Williams is out. I believe he's been confirmed out. Let me double check. Yeah, he is confirmed out. Let's see. Let me just sort by Ohio State news here quick. That's a 3:30 kick. Travion Henderson is expected to play. And then Hayden will probably function as the second running back in a game that could get out of hand. Malik Cunningham has been ruled out for Louisville, so we do have some clarity on that situation. A few other, maybe smaller things to monitor in the late afternoon games, but I think those are the biggest few. Anything else that you're keeping your eye on today?
Yeah, I really think the Ohio State running back situation, I've been talking with PSU about it all morning, and, it's just a situation where you're just going to have to say, this is what I think happens. You might be wrong about it, but it's like you can't just say, well, I think, Travion gets half the game and Hayden gets half the game, so I don't want to play anybody. Like, you kind of need to take a stand there. And it's interesting with Hayden's price, and we'll get to in Nakia Watson, that they're both basically equal in price. So you're not going to know if Travion is out before that Washington State game locks. So, no, that's really all I think you're waiting on. Like you said, no Martinez for K-State, but really – kind of scary, at least, that, no real big injury news we're kind of waiting on.
All right. With that, let's go ahead and start digging in. We've got a handful of quarterbacks at the top today, and a lot of the ownership is going to be concentrated in a few games because you've got kind of these clunkers, right? Georgia, Kentucky, not the most exciting game. Boston College, Notre Dame, not the most exciting game. The 12 o'clock Eastern starts, none of them are really that exciting. So the handful of games that do have high totals, you are going to see hefty ownership on the primary players in those games, and that'll show through as we go through the positions here. But CJ Stroud, highest priced quarterback. Stetson Bennett is still up there as well, though he probably doesn't deserve that big of a price tag. You've got Toon and Duggan, your other quarterbacks above $8K, and maybe throw Delora in that mix at $7,900 in a revenge game for him. What are your thoughts on kind of how you want to prioritize those top 5 quarterbacks today?
Yeah, this is my smallest quarterback pool I've had all season long. I only have 6 of these guys, but we can still talk through all of them. CJ Stroud, I break him down every week. Everyone's talking about the running game for Maryland, but once again, if he throws 5 or 6 touchdowns out, at that price, this might be a week, and this is definitely a 4 running back week if you want to do it. I had to build some lineups with that. And I also just kind of let the optimizer, I just built a bunch of lineups and said, okay, I'm not going to put any, usually I just put 100% in the super flex. I just didn't put any restrictions on that. And it was like 50-50 quarterback or running back in the super flex. So, but Stroud is always there. This might be a slate where you just need raw points, right? If CJ Stroud puts you up 35 points, maybe he's not going to smash value, but he's going to give you, where quarterback is really not solidified out in those top guys. Yeah, I'm not going to play any Stetson Bennett. I just, the upside just has not been there, and he has to get a perfect game script for that to happen. Clayton Tune's probably my favorite guy up here, along with Delora. ECU, his defense is not good. Houston's is much worse, I would say. But Tune is in a perfect game script every week because he's usually always coming from behind. So he'll probably be the highest owned quarterback, him and Tank Dell, but rightfully so. Then, Jaden Delora is really interesting. Washington State has kind of done well limiting opposing offenses. But once again, when Arizona's defense is letting them score all the time, they're going to be coming back. So both Tune and Delora are kind of in the same game script. They're underdogs in their games. They're probably going to be playing from behind, so they're probably going to be throwing at the end of the game. So I definitely like them. Duggan, man, I'm just off that whole Baylor TCU game. Like, I think that is a real letdown spot. Like, you hear me say that every week about TCU. But man, the weather is rainy and cold up in Waco this week. Like, Baylor just got blown out at home by Kansas State. This is a game that just doesn't make sense. But I'm off Duggan here. But I could definitely see playing him because he's had a great season.
Yeah, we went on a little road trip last Saturday after I mentioned my wife was getting all geared up for the local high school football game in the playoffs, and our local squad got smacked down. So she decided she wanted to go out of town and do some shopping and go out for dinner afterwards. And we had like a 2-hour drive back home. And on the drive back home, I listened to that Texas TCU game on the radio. It almost put me to sleep. 3-0 at halftime. It was rough. That TCU team just keeps proving the doubters like Mike are wrong. So we'll see what they do today. Everybody that's on the fringe of the playoff discussion is really rooting for a TCU loss at some point down the line here as the season winds down. But I'm kind of with you, Duggan, at that price against a team that's, Baylor's probably going to try to grind this game out and make it a little bit of a slog. I just don't think he makes sense. I like those other guys better. Delora's been pretty impressive for a resurgent team with Arizona that nobody really expected anything out of this year, but they've been playing better football lately. So I like pretty much in agreement with your thoughts. Those guys, Tune and Delora are going to be the obvious chalk there. The other guys, definitely your tournament pivots. And if you're staying away from that Ohio State running back situation, you probably should roll some Stroud in your GPP builds. All right, let's talk about the next kind of the mid-range. You got a lot of options in the 6 and 7K range here. They don't grade out quite as well from a projection standpoint, a lot of these guys. But, Daniels has shown some upside. He's definitely going to be risk-reward at pretty much every start. You got Cameron Ward in there on the other side of that Washington State-Arizona game in that kind of upper 6K range. Not a whole lot of other guys in that area that look too appealing today.
Yeah, I guess we should mention that. I don't know. I have no idea who's going to get the snaps at quarterback for Kansas today. Jalen Daniels is who we have projected in, but, they've kind of been murky on, like, Jalen Daniels is doing more in practice. He's getting ready. So, once again, the good thing is if you want to play Kansas quarterback, I just build with Jalen Daniels. And I think Bean is like 6,800. Bean does become a little bit interesting if Daniels is, like, ruled out. Like, if Bean gets a start, he's still risky, but,
yeah, he's shown some upside at times.
Yeah, like I said, I would build, if you want access to that situation, just build with Daniels, and then you can just drop down to Bean and get some more salary somewhere else. So that's how I would approach that situation. Yeah, some of these other guys like DJU, I'm just never on his bandwagon. McCarthy, Clifford, they're in some bad weather. Well, at least McCarthy is. I do have Ewers in my pool. I think that last week he looked horrible. He didn't complete a pass, I think, until like the second quarter against TCU, and their offensive line just got destroyed. So I don't mind Ewers and GPPs. The guy right below him is Cam Ward. I've talked about Cam Ward all season. We really haven't got to play him that much because he's in the Pac-12. He's not on main slates, but Cam Ward is my favorite GPP quarterback of the slate. Arizona's defense is just letting everybody do whatever they want. I mean, Nakia Watson is a great play, but he's so cheap you can play him with Ward too. I mean, all you need from Watson is for him to get you 100 yards and a touchdown or something like that. But if they score 50 points, and Cam Ward's going to have a lot to do with that. So I don't mind playing him with Ward. And then I guess we can drop down to probably the best play to slate is Holton Allers. I always pronounce his name wrong. But, I mean, he's in a dream matchup. I mean, he should probably be like Clayton Tune's pricier, and I'd still consider him. I mean, Houston's defense is atrocious. I mean, they made Kurt Warner's son for Temple last week look like Kurt Warner. They just gave up 77 points to SMU. I mean, this often, I mean, when you saw them against Kansas, like, I think I wanted to look back. I don't think they've given up less than 30 points in like a game this season. I'm just probably making that up, but it's probably pretty close to being accurate. So I love Holton Allers this week, and it's not going to be a hot take or anything. If you're playing cash or single entry, like, he's got to be in your lineup. And I think the only path to him not, hitting his projection or more is like him getting hurt or something like that. So Allers is like my favorite play at the slate. But in that mid range, him and Cam Ward are definitely great value. I say value options, but you don't have to go all the way up, and you can still get access to a pretty good game environment. I mean, the best two game environments by far are Washington State, Arizona, and ECU and Houston. So you want as much exposure to those games as possible. And this is a good slate to where I think I have like 8 teams just completely X'd out. So when you get a slate like that and you can just get rid of these guys, it just helps out to put down that player pool and just make those stances easier to take.
Yeah, so Houston's points allowed this year, you weren't too far off, but close enough. 35, 33, 48, 27, 27, 32, 20, but that was against Navy, 27 against USF, and then 77 and 36. So it's, 40 plus points a game if you average that out. I did not do that math, but around there. And you got a quarterback that loves to sling it. He's a senior. It's senior day. It's $6,200. The clear kind of quarterback 2 choice today. And really, I don't think you go below him at 6,200. I mean, I suppose you can. Like, any interest in any of these other guys like below 6,000 or at 6,000, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, last night I was just laughing. Just like MJ Morris, also, he's tagged, and rightfully so if he does play, but he's also questionable to play for NC State. People were talking about the Indiana quarterback situation last night, and I was like, man, I really don't think you need to go there. Ja'Cory Brown, PSU was talking about him earlier in the Discord. I mean, I don't have him in my pool. He has a terrible matchup against Clemson. At that price, like, if you get him to put you up, that projection, like 15 points, does he help you out? But it's a weird slate to where, like, there are 2 running backs that are under 4K that can probably put up that too. So I just don't see the need to do that on this slate. So, but I wouldn't fault you for playing him. If like you really want to punt, just fit in every other stud, you could do that. Just realize that his floor is probably like 5 points.
Yeah, and I mean, it is always appealing because that $4,500 quarterback, it does help you do a lot with the rest of your lineup. But it's not like the lineup construction is too much more difficult on DraftKings with, Ehlers at 6,200 as your QB2. If you need that $1,700 or you want some risk reward and some GPPs, I get it. But probably not going there too much myself. All right, let's go ahead and move to the running back position. We've got the usual guys, the workhorses at the top, and they're way above everyone else in terms of salary. There's like a $900 gap after we get through the first 3 guys. So it's Robinson, Blake Corum, and Chase Brown. But Blake Corum and Chase Brown in that Michigan-Illinois game that is almost certainly not going to feature a lot of plays, and those are the 2 defenses that are allowing the fewest yards per game in all of college football. So you're going to see like a 13-7 type of game here. It's not that I don't like Corum. It's not that I don't like Brown as running backs, but I think if you're spending, like, it has to be Bijan, and I don't really think it's that close, frankly.
I mean, not if you looked at Bijan's box score last week, he didn't do anything, right? No, I'm just joking on that. Like, I was surprised to see, like, that whole Texas offense just got shut down. But yeah, that doesn't, hopefully maybe we get some recency bias and people are like, oh, last week he only put up, I want to say he maybe put up 5 points or something. It was like his lowest of low floor games. But yeah, I mean, he's the best option here. Kansas defenses, if you look at them, have gotten progressively worse as the season has gone on. He's a clear top option. Blake Corum, him and Chase Brown. I mean, Brown's probably not 100% here. And Corum, you guys see what Donovan Edwards is. The thing about Corum, though, is like, yeah, like you need him at 8,500. He's got to put you up 2 touchdowns and 150 plus. Could he do that here? He could. Like if Donovan Edwards is out, Corum is going to get every carry because this is probably a closer game. And like CJ Stokes, they do not trust CJ Stokes really at all. So I'm just going to, like with guys like Corum, who I just am so terrified of being underweight on because he smashed me so much before, I just really put in that 9%. I put that as a max. I put 1% as a min. I just get whatever the optimizer gives me, which really isn't that much, but just to have him in some lineups. So I think Bijan's a clear way to go at the top.
Agreed. That will be what I am doing. I don't mind, some Corum exposure for the reasons that you laid out, but not a priority for me by any means. And part of that is because that next range is so loaded with options. I love Braylon Allen today. Wisconsin has kind of had a run of tough matchups, in that Big Ten where you've got a lot of slower paced games, a lot of decent defensive teams that play the field position game. And, they played Iowa last week. I guess they haven't played a ton of really, really tough opponents, but they had Ohio State a few weeks back. But Nebraska, a disaster, dumpster fire of a team that can't score any points. Wisconsin should be in control today. I think this is the Braylon Allen breakout game, so he's my favorite option in the 7K range. But Deuce Vaughn grades out well, Keaton Mitchell grades out well, Kendry Miller grades out well, so certainly no fault with any of those guys. How are you kind of breaking down that 7K range?
Yeah, Deuce just gets such a big bump with Will Howard at quarterback because, like, Will Howard knows that, like, hey, I'm not going to call my number every single time like Martinez does, and, like, Deuce is very involved in the passing game when he's in the quarterback. So Deuce Vaughn's probably, like, the overall, and you can see with the projection, it's not a hot take, probably the best projected point per dollar running back on the slate. Keaton Mitchell's great for ECU as well. He did get dinged up with a concussion, but I don't see a way where if this is competitive that he doesn't get a great majority of the snaps there against a bad Houston defense. I'm with you on Braylon Allen. That he hasn't been getting as many touches, didn't last week, but I think a lot of that was due to, them just getting destroyed by Iowa. So, like, he's not really a passing down back. So they had Garendo in there. But I like Braylon Allen. Kendry Miller is the same thing as Corum. Like, I just never get him right, but I just keep playing him every week. This might be the run that it stops, but, I think his consistency – if you want a consistent back in the 6Ks, I think he scored over 20 fantasy points every single game this year. So don't necessarily think his ceiling is that high, but you can definitely play him, and I'll have some in my pool. But, yeah, I'm with you. Allen, Vaughn, my favorite options here. Keaton Mitchell might get a little bit overlooked, I think, just because people don't want to play Ehlers and Mitchell, but I'll have plenty of that because, I think that ECU puts up, 40-plus points here. So you want access to both of those unless Ehlers throws for 6 of them, but you just never know. But those are my 2 favorite options around there with Deuce, and I'm with you on Allen.
Yeah, you can certainly mix and match those guys. If we sort by point per dollar, obviously, besides Watson, we'll get to, you were correct that Vaughn is the top guy in terms of point per dollar projection. But I will mix and match this whole range, I think, in my GPP builds today. Right below those guys, Hemby, Garwo, Chris Rodriguez, Kenny McIntosh. Don't really love those guys today. You get to the bottom part of the 6K range, you got guys that kind of grade out a little better. Henderson, obviously risky because of the murky injury status. But you've got Will Shipley, Devin Neal, Richard Reese in here. Your thoughts on kind of the lower part of this middle tier?
Yeah, I don't mind Will Shipley every week, especially if he's going to be sub 10% owned. Against Miami defense and the game they're going to control if it doesn't get too out of hand. I love Shipley and GPPs. Devin Neal, even in a terrible game script last week against Texas Tech, he still ran for 190 yards. So I think from a volume perspective, he's still there. Travion. So it's just, like I said, you just have to decide what you think happens here. Like every single week, it seemed like if Travion and Mayan were in, they were getting 100% of the snaps. So the only thing that changes here is the huge spread and then playing Michigan next week. If you think that Henderson, even if Henderson's going to give it a go, do you think that he gets a majority of the snaps? That's really what you have to decide. Because if that's the case, he's a great play at 10%. If you think that Dallas Hayden's going to get a lot of the work because they're just trying to get Travion and Mine as healthy as they can for next week against Michigan, then play that angle. I really don't think there's anything in between. So Henderson's a good GPP play, but once again, you have to monitor if he's actually going to be out there and play. Wiley is an okay option. He had a good game against UCLA last week. But I really, once you dip down like into the sub 5Ks, I think this range above 4K is really interesting. Like Nicholas Singleton, Audric Estime. These guys are not going to project well. They're going to be completely unowned. We saw Singleton, right? These guys can just break the slate. Logan Diggs, Katron Allen, like those four guys, right? They're two running backs. They're, what people want to play solidified options, right? Both Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, Estime, and Logan Diggs all split work. So those guys, I could see one of them just going off and being in the GPP winning lineup. I won't have a ton of them, but you don't need a ton of them to be over the field. So this is kind of running back dead zone once you get below 4K, which we'll get to next. But I think those guys are live in GPPs just because no one's really going to play them, and they'll probably get a little overlooked.
Yeah, definitely GPP upside options there in games that, both of those teams are pretty large favorites. So you get the right guy that gets the 120 yards and a couple touchdowns, relatively cheap price, low ownership. Definitely makes sense to mix them in if you're building, 50-plus lineups today. Then there's nobody else really outside of maybe Mathis that has a reasonable projection, Diggs you mentioned, outside of the complete punts under 4K, which would be Nakia Watson, Stacey Sneed, and Hayden on the other side of that kind of Ohio State timeshare that we've been talking about so far. But Watson, this is probably a bigger free square than Levine last week at 3,800 with the workload that Watson has been getting. So it seems like a lock and load value there.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned. I mean, last week everyone was on Levine. This is a better spot. Remember, Levine kind of got some shine taken away from him with one of the other running backs that I'm blanking on getting time. But Nakia Watson, the only way he doesn't get a ton of carries here is if Jenkins gets some, who's like $1,500 more than him. But nah, this is Watson. I just lock him almost. I mean, so it's cool that I would rank these three guys exactly how you have checked in terms of Watson is your sure play, cash play. I don't see any really upside to fading him. If he gets you 10 points and lets you get in all the studs, it doesn't matter. Stacey Sneed is right there in the middle, right? We know he's going to play. He's not going to get all the carries, but he's averaging 10, 15 yards a carry. So he is your GPP option there because he's right below Watson. You see the ownership. Hayden might be the best play out of all of them, depending on what happens. If Travion Henderson gets ruled out and it's just Hayden out there, I would argue that he almost becomes as good of a play as Watson. Now, the problem is you're not going to know that before that game kicks. But Hayden's a good play on his own. If he does start and Henderson's out, he becomes one of the best plays on the slate. So these three options, you got Watson, your safe cash play. Sneed is in play for GPPs. And then Hayden, the same thing. But Hayden becomes an extremely better play if for some reason Travion Henderson gets ruled out. So, but yeah, Watson, just play him. I mean, there's just like Levine last week, if he puts up 100 yards and a touchdown, you're going to need him because he's going to let you fit in everything else.
And the tricky part that you've mentioned is that, if you're looking to maybe in some GPP builds, okay, I'll just plug in Watson for now and then I'll swap to Hayden. If Henderson is out, you're probably not going to know that because the Washington State game starts at 2 Eastern and the Ohio State game is what is that, a 3:30 Eastern?
Yeah. So that's why I think Hayden goes a little, he's projected for 10% now. Yeah. I think he probably comes in around that. But if you think about this, right, if Henderson was ruled out, and we knew that now, Hayden's projection would go to 20 points and he would just be right there with Watson. Right. So I almost want to go 20% off the bat. I don't think there's any place where it's Hayden doesn't see snaps. So he could get the whole second half even if Travion plays. If Ohio State goes up 31-0 at halftime,
they're not risking Henderson with Michigan.
Travion's not going to play the second half. And they're going to be running on. So it's the perfect game script for Hayden no matter what. So I really like him in GPPs because, people are going to have to make that decision, like you said, an hour and a half earlier.
Yeah. All right. Like those takes at running back, let's go ahead and move to wide receiver. And you will probably have the funds to spend up for one guy today. We don't have some of the usual guys like Rashee Rice and Hutchinson that we've been targeting all year long on the DraftKings slate today, but we do have Houston and their kind of target monster, Nathaniel Dell, there at the top. You can see he is projecting as the chalk. You've got the two Ohio State guys coming in right behind him. What are your thoughts on this top group of wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, Tank Dell has 114 targets on the season. So not quite like Rashee Rice territory, but I mean, he's got 12 and 13. Like, he hasn't had less than 8 targets in a game, in the last 6 games, I think. So just looking that up just because I know he's around there. But yeah, talk about Dell, but you also, a guy I really like here too is Marvin Harrison. I mean, he's really kind of separated himself a little bit. You're going to get him at, 4 times less. Obviously, a less, not necessarily game environment total, but I mean, they could blow him out. And he just needs a lot. He just needs all the touchdowns really to pay off. So I like Harrison and Egbuka too. Egbuka, I mentioned, he's had a couple quiet games. I wouldn't be surprised to see him put up, like, you can see what he's put up 3 touchdowns. So these guys are all interesting. I'd say Dell is like your cat. Same thing. Dell should probably be in your single entry lineup if you're building one, or cash games. And then Harrison and Egbuka are more your GPP plays. Jacob Cowing is also really interesting as well. All 3 of those Arizona receivers. And then Quentin Johnson, like, I still don't think he's healthy. And I'm just off TCU in general in this game. That's not a surprise. But yeah, up top between those guys, I'm going to have access to all of them. And I'm probably going to try and go overweight on Harrison and Egbuka, and might be a little bit under the field on Tank Dell just because I think I'm going to have him in my main and cash lineup. So I don't necessarily need all the exposure to him in GPPs. But I like Egbuka. I think he is definitely live to be like the highest scoring wide receiver of the slate.
And relatively ignored for the reasons that you mentioned, with Harrison taking on a lead role a little bit more frequently of late, and Dell obviously being the chalk. So we'll definitely have all 3 of those guys in my GPP pool. The next few guys like Winstead, I think are he's perfect stack with his quarterback. Zay Flowers doesn't really have a quarterback, so Quentin Johnston, if you're playing some Duggan, is fine. But I think these guys are a clear step down from that top tier. So I'm not prioritizing a whole lot of guys in this next range. Anybody that interests you?
Yeah, I like Dorian Singer just because, they're going to be passing like between him and then McMillan, which we'll get to a little bit lower. I like all those Arizona receivers because they're going to be playing from behind all game. Yeah, Brock Bowers is probably, I think, the best GPP play of this range. I love targeting him after weeks where he doesn't really do too much, because then you catch him when he gets that 30, 35-point game, and you're going to get him at low ownership. So I definitely like him in GPPs. And Xavier Worthy, same thing. His price is pretty cheap. I still think you can play him with Bijan. Like, if you want to get – but I don't – like, Bijan's not going to be like 50% owned, so it's not like you need to pivot off of him. I think you can play Worthy with Bijan and like yours in the lineup. You probably want him in there, but I like Worthy for GPPs too. But yeah, other than that, is kind of like a dead range. You mentioned Winstead, who I like as well. I think he's a little less chalky than maybe CJ Johnson because he's about $1,000 more expensive. But yeah, that kind of sums up this range. I think Bowers is definitely, I'll go overweight on him in GPP.
Yeah, he tends to be around 10% every week, and there's always that multi-touchdown upside against a Kentucky team that has struggled a little bit more. And by the way, I laughed at your article because I am in the same camp of why is Will Levis considered a top prospect. I don't get it. I just don't. And if you guys have been playing DFS college football for a long time, this totally reminds me of Christian Hackenberg a few years back, where he was just this puzzling, solid prospect that everyone that played college football DFS was wondering, why does everyone, and why do the pro scouts like Christian Hackenberg? And then he ended up completely flaming out at the NFL level. I think that's exactly what Levis is destined for, but we're on the same page there.
Like, I might not watch the NFL again if Will Levis is a number 1 overall pick in the draft. Like, that would be, I have no clue. If that happens, I don't know what I'm going to do.
What if he turns into a stud?
I mean, I can reverse it. I mean, we saw what happened with Bo Nix, although I think I might have killed Bo Nix last week, but we've seen what I've done before. So it hasn't worked in college, but no doubt I'm going to keep dogging Levis, and then Levis is going to turn into, number 1 stud going to, I don't know where he's going to go, but yeah, NFL is so, I don't want to get off on tangent, but NFL is so, it's like he has NFL tools. Like, does he have the NFL tools that he's like a good quarterback, or is he just big and like has big hands and can throw? Like, I don't know. Anyways, Yeah.
That's neither here nor there. I just forgot to mention it at quarterback and wanted to mention that I agree
No,
with the
you're
Will
good.
Levis
But
take.
you don't consider him at any point of the week. That's the thing. You don't he's not good. So,
Well, yeah,
anyways,
he just hasn't been a DFS option like ever, except maybe against Vandy a time or two. But yeah, so in this kind of middle tier, I mean, Worthy, we mentioned a bounce back spot for that Texas offense. Hard to ignore Worthy at 6,500. He's clearly my favorite. CJ Johnson, I think you might have mentioned at 6,200. But anybody else in the 6K range that you like?
yeah, I like so breaking down the Washington State receivers for a second is you see Deshaun Stribling at 6K. No one's really going to play him. He's kind of moved into the slot with Renard Bell and Robert Farrell being hurt. Bell is going to come back here. Did say he's going to be a little bit limited. Farrell's going to come back here probably. So that might move him a little bit to the outside. But Stribling, if there's a scenario where you get confirmation that Farrell and Bell aren't going to play, Stribling becomes a great play because I think he just solidifies his role a little bit more. CJ Johnson, yeah, I'm on him every week. I think he did get dinged up last week too, but he should be good to go. But my favorite GPP play from this range is McMillan. He leads them in yards per attempt, passing yard per reception for Arizona and touchdowns. So I think he's definitely live at that 5%. You can get 10, 15% and just be double the field, especially if people are going to play Watson. Other than that, in this range, I have Renard Bell in my pool. Jaden Reed was a lot better play, I think, before the weather kind of Indiana, Michigan State just feels like a gross game with the weather supposed to be, the winds are supposed to be up, it's supposed to be raining. I do like Reed, but if you are going off of projections, I might bump him down just a little bit because I think that these conditions are not going to be that well. And then Bell is coming back this week. So him and Keon Coleman are really the only other guys in this range I think I'm kind of looking at. Antonio Williams, sorry for Clemson too, 5.2K. He is risky, man. I hate targeting Clemson receivers, but it does appear that DJU is trying to make him his number one. Yeah. So Williams is not bad as a not punt option, but he's a good mid-range option. He's kind of like Shipley. No one's really going to play him in GPPs.
Yeah, he has clearly become the number one wide receiver target for them over the last couple of weeks, so I don't mind that at 5,200. Otherwise, it's a pretty rough kind of range there in that 5-6K range. We sort by point per dollar. We've got a few values that stand out in that 4K range. Samuel Brown has kind of become the number 2 for Houston at 4,200. He would probably be my favorite. Sanders is getting some buzz for Texas at 4,500. Those are the two guys that definitely project the best. You got a favorite amongst that group or maybe anybody else in the punt tier?
Yeah, I mean, Brown is just the reason he's popping there is because of game environment, right? That total is one of the highest on the slate. Not saying that he's a slam dunk play. I could definitely see him not getting there, but in terms of value, you can see there's not too much on the slate. Jatavian Sanders is kind of scary when he's going to get up to that range, but Kansas is pretty bad, so I don't mind that. A couple guys I'll mention down here. Actually, Deadman 3.0K for this week. And a lot of that's dependent on what happens at Washington State. But Leighton Smithson at 3K, he's not going to project very well. And you can see there he's going to be maybe 5%. I'll be all over that if we get some kind of confirmation that Farrell and maybe Bell, one of those two is not going to play. But Smithson's getting a ton of snaps. I think he's pretty solidified there in a great game environment. So Smithson is a guy, Deadman, if you want some exposure to, you can definitely get that. So I do not hate getting some Leighton Smithman in some lineups, but I mean, really, I think that's my only receiver below 4K of the slate. So that's as low as I'm going.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about Fanduel a little bit because the slates are quite a bit different. They've got the Florida Vandy game on there. They've got the Oregon State, Arizona State game on there. And then they've got a lot of these more appealing later games. Tennessee on the slate, Ole Miss and Arkansas, Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, pretty much a guaranteed shootout every year, and USC, UCLA, which has, I believe, a 78-point total, and a 2-point spread. So one of the weeks where I think your lineup on FanDuel, I mean, it's going to look completely different from what you build on DraftKings today.
Yeah, completely different. I mean, if it's weird, man, I almost wish they did not include Florida Vandy on the slate. I mean, we talked about Mike Wright, but one thing is that Anthony Richardson is a good play at quarterback. If you want to play him there, he's not that expensive, and we know he's playing Vandy, so both of those guys are in play. And Wright really opens up anything else you want to do in your lineup. I mean, you think about that; that's almost like a dead min price quarterback on DraftKings equivalent. So he's not that bad. The optimizers keep spitting him out, so I'm trying to rein him back in.
And the cap is a little tougher on FanDuel than it usually is, so that's part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, well, you look at it, right? So he's $7K. If you just sort by salary on FanDuel, I mean, if you want to play Caleb Williams, DTR, Jordan Addison, and Charbonnet, I mean, you don't have any salary left. So you're going to have to punt somewhere. So if you don't want to punt at quarterback, you're going to have to go to wide receiver. We got to give PSU a shout out for it, and he's going to project well. Is one interesting part of the slate, Tennessee, South Carolina. Jaheim Bell is a tight end. He's $5K, but he got 13 carries last week. Like, he's kind of a hybrid. Like, they don't have any running backs, so he definitely has a very low floor. Like, he had 30 yards on those 30 carries against a terrible Florida defense, but I mean, he's going to be getting touches. So that is your definition of a wide receiver on FanDuel. Is he going to touch the ball? Okay, I want to maybe get him in. Same thing with so with Tennessee, Cedric Tillman, you see him right there. Last week, Cedric Tillman came out for senior day in his uniform. Then Cedric Tillman showed up on the sideline in street clothes. So I don't see there's really no need for him to play here. Why would he not play senior day last week if he was going to come and be what are they, 30, 25-point favorites against South Carolina? So he is risky. I would just make sure that you make sure he's warming up. So you're going to have to find value somewhere if you want to jam in USC, UCLA, which I think is the highest game total on this slate. Because so on this slate, right, you don't have either of those two games. You don't have Houston and ECU, and you don't have Arizona State, Arizona, and Washington. So, one other guy I didn't mention was Damian Martinez is 6.8K at running back for Oregon State. I don't know what they're doing with his salary there. So I definitely think that, and it's one of the early games. So his price just doesn't make sense. So FanDuel is a completely different build. I mean, it's weird where, my two highest owned quarterbacks on DraftKings, my three highest, I can't even play them on FanDuel. So it's an interesting build for sure.
Yeah, and then you got, Charbonnet, you got Martinez, you mentioned some of the punts, Mike Wright, the Tillman if he plays. Jackson Dart is a really good play on FanDuel as well against Arkansas, which, you'd think that they should be able to put up some points. You see what Judkins has been doing. I mean, all these guys that are available on FanDuel that, aren't on DraftKings. So it just makes that build look a whole lot different and makes it basically two completely different slates today. Anything else on this FanDuel build here before we call it a show?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things to monitor, like Mario Williams for USC. He's supposed to be back, so if he is back, then that definitely upgrades Caleb Williams a little bit. But USC did lose Travis Dye for the season. It actually looked like kind of gross injury last week. So Austin Jones is not the worst play. I think he split some with Rayleigh Brown. I think if you're looking for punts and you want to get access to that game, I mean, I think those two guys, they probably split, but they're not bad options for USC. Bedlam is kind of getting overlooked. I was just from a game perspective, right? Bedlam doesn't mean anything. When have we ever said that in terms of the Big 12 championship or anything? Bedlam doesn't Oklahoma is 5-5. It is nuts. So Bedlam is getting a little bit overlooked. There's always points in that game. So I think if on FanDuel, everyone's going to be going to USC, UCLA, rightfully so. Bedlam is a little bit sneaky. He gets some Spencer Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. Eric Gray has been destroying. So I think that's a sneaky game to target on the FanDuel slate just because everyone's going to go elsewhere. And that game always seems to, just out of nowhere put up a 59-52 game or something like that. So that's just my GBP thoughts kind of on FanDuel. And then, Florida and Vanderbilt I could see playing a Mike Wright, Anthony Richardson lineup. And, if Anthony Richardson and Mike Wright, if you play them in a lineup and they both get you 25, 30 points, I mean, that opens up basically everything else that you want to do skill position wise. So interesting slate, but I definitely think that you want to probably get Charbonnet in there because he has back-to-back 44-point games. So I think he's probably the best running back play on the slate. But to get like him, Bijan, DTR, and Williams, it's really tough.
Yeah.
So like you're gonna have to go dumpster diving at wide receiver if you want to make that happen.
And you mentioned that Bedlam game. Spencer Sanders has said that he is playing. He did come in last week and help them come back. So it obviously something you need to monitor if you're going to play him. But seems like his is going to give it a go this week. So, all right. One question before we get out of here. Let's see. Jake Kearney says Corum and Vaughn with a cheap running back, or Miller and Neal. Boy, I can't make sense of your question there. The first one has 3 guys and the second one has 4 guys. It'd be like Corum, Vaughn, and a cheap running back, or Miller, Neal, and Bijan. Those are 3 running back combos that are probably around the same price. So Corum, Vaughn, and a punt, or Miller, Neal, and Bijan.
I'll go the first one, just assuming that the first one is Nakia Watson as that
punt.
Cheap punt. So just because I think Neal and Miller are really volatile. I think just in terms of they're not necessarily volatile, but like from a ceiling perspective, I can see them getting to 20 points, but can they put up like 35, 40 points and be the difference? I mean, that's what you got to consider there.
Yeah, I think he clarified that the cheap running back is on both of them, so it's it's Corum and Vaughn, or Bijan with one of Miller or Neal. So it'd be Corum and Vaughn, or Bijan and Neal, or Miller.
That's tough. I mean, I'd probably still lean one just because I think Deuce is probably the best running back play of the slate with price and everything factored in. So I'll still go one, even though – and Corum's got a safe floor. So if Corum puts up, 25, 30 points, I like the first option, I think.
Yeah, I agree as well, especially in a GPP. I think that gives you some sneaky upside at lower ownership. All right, with that, we will go ahead and call it a show and get out of here. We'll finalize our lineups and let you finalize yours as well. Thanks to Micah for joining me. We'll be back here next Saturday, same time, same place. Thanks to Steve for doing some behind the scenes for us early on a Saturday morning. We hope you all enjoy your weekend, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you next week, everybody. Take care.